relationship and relational, and that is how we make those connections. That's how we can feel and hear and experience, um, that continuous thread.
Yep.
Um, yeah.
Kofi, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. My name's Kaola Kinghorn. I'm a scholar, teacher, an arts reviewer, and journalist. I run the outlet, The Rhetorical Review, and my work focuses on how stories, sound, and performance shape memory, identity, and the ways we understand one another. We met briefly after the college conference on college compositions and communications in Cleveland this year, 2026. And you gave this beautiful talk, the 4C Chair's address. Your address was just so powerful. You received the standing ovation, and I remember not only being struck by your reflections on music, family, and listening, but when witnessing others in the room being moved by your words. And there was this real sense of recognition in that moment. So I wanted to invite you here to extend that conversation today. But before we do that, I wanted to give you a moment to introduce yourself to any new viewers, readers that might not know you in your own words. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm Kofi J. Adisa. I am currently the assistant director at Towson University. I'm also going to be directing their graduate writing center, I guess more in the fall of 2026 than currently, but I'm in the process of building that up. Prior to that, I was an associate professor at a community college in Maryland, and I was an adjunct in a bunch of community colleges in Maryland. Well, a bunch, maybe a little hyperbolic, maybe just three. And prior to that, I've done a lot of different teaching in different spaces. Community college was one of those spaces. I also taught at a charter school, middle school, for about 5.5 years. And then I was in graduate school at the University of Connecticut. Prior to that, I was, well, not even prior, but at around the same time, I was also a copy aide at the Washington Post, where I got a chance to freelance and I did a little bit of copy editing. And so I've done a lot. I also worked at the Library of Congress. So I've done a lot of different types of writing.
Yeah.
And in terms of community, I used to do volunteer at a transitional living facility called Sasha Bruce. It used to be called the Sasha Bruce House, but then it became the Sasha Bruce Network. And then when Lorton Prison had a Lorton Prison College, I also volunteered there.
Mm.
And we did a lot of different, well, we did a study group, and I was a part of two different African-centered organizations. I'll just put it that way. Um, so for well over 30 years, I've been in and around things that deal with writing and reading, of course. I used to do poetry readings. I think that was part of my address. I mentioned how that really helped inform me. In fact, later on today, I also host a podcast with two of my former colleagues at Howard Community College, which was the college I was working at before leaving to go to Towson University. We still hold our podcast. It's called Bookish, a casual book club. And
Love it.
yeah, our theme today is going to be about what book made you become an English major. And so one of the things I'll probably mention is how there are books that made me want to be English major, but there were also
Mhm.
books that made me want. And so that is going to be the focus on what I would talk about. But in terms of my actual writing, I've done a variety of things. Like I said, I put together a chapbook called Jahi Plain Indigo. I've freelanced feature pieces for the Washington Post. Now, when I tell people this, they might look up my name, Kofi Adisa, and they're like, I don't see anything for Kofi Adisa. That wasn't the name I had before.
Uh,
My name used to be Joseph Kelly. And
Joseph
so, yeah,
Public.
Joseph Kelly. Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
and so I changed my name legally in 2000.
Okay.
And so it used to be, and I used when I would freelance for the Washington Post, they would be mostly local features, but it would be under the pen name of J.A. Kelly, which was kind of like my initials in my last name.
Hmm.
And so now it's more or less I do stuff as Kofi J. Adisa or Kofi Adisa, and I've had a short story published called Hidden Wells, and
Okay.
I had a piece in composition studies looking at the future of conferencing to
Mm,
begin with, and that came out maybe last year or something. So, and then I have also participated in the MLA 4Cs
right.
Joint Task Force on AI. I'm part of the special committee for 4Cs looking
Hmm.
at generative AI in
Right.
writing studies, well, composition and writing studies. And I do a lot of different things like that,
Hmm.
which lacks a lot of music and it lacks a lot of rhythm, but as opposed
It
to my
all
own
adds,
stuff.
yeah, it all adds to the experience, right?
Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of a large nutshell of what I do. There's plenty more, but
Hmm.
yeah, that should give people a taste of what I bring to the table.
So fascinating. I did not know the breadth of your work, honestly. That's so cool. But I think it really showed in your talk the experience that you had. Just a quick follow-up. When you were talking about the books that you're going to talk about today on your podcast, you said
Hmm.
the books that made you want to be an English major and a book that made you what?
Want to be a writer.
Oh, writer. And what can I spoil that for my readers? What are the?
Oh no, it's not really going to be a spoil. It's just going to be a continuation. I
Yeah.
think that, yeah. And so, like there was and actually it was a short story I read when I was in undergrad.
Hmm.
Flannery O'Connor, a good man is hard to find. That was a story that made me want to be an English major
Yeah.
because I just really, well, first of all, I was also raised Catholic.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's this sort of uh, level in which being a Catholic comes through with Flannery O'Connor in ways that I don't think any other Catholic writer could be like. Oh, that's a cute dog.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, my dog. If my dog heard a voice, it'll start barking. Um, and then, but the books that made me want, well, the writer that made me want to be a writer was Ernest Gaines. Um, his work, and I should, in a way, I would explain this is that there's reading you do in the academy, and then there's reading you do outside the academy. For
Yeah.
me, a lot of the reading that I was doing outside of the academy
Hmm.
didn't necessarily fit into the academy, and as at the time that I was on my journey as an English major, um, what I thought I was going to become was an 18th century scholar.
Yeah.
Um,
Sounds.
and I realized that the language of the 18th century didn't necessarily fit my mouth,
Uh-huh.
if that makes sense. Like my way of talking and my way of thinking and
Yeah.
my that it just didn't fit. And so I
Right.
always struggle, even though I enjoyed it and I enjoyed
Yeah.
reading
Yeah.
um, that particular time period, it was, really the language of community that I find so prevalent in Ernest Gaines's work
Yeah.
that spoke to me, that it was almost like speaking a language that I was mostly familiar with. So that's what made me want to be a writer. Yeah,
I love that. Thank you for sharing that with me. It was
no
actually
problem.
through Renaissance literature that I kind of found my doorway into the major too. I mean, and other contemporary writers as well, but it was a Renaissance teacher and medieval lit teacher that really like supported me and drew me in, So that's so interesting. I think a lot of us really connect with those older texts, and maybe we don't stay there, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The weird thing about the Flannery O'Connor thing, because she was a Southern lit, I mean, she would fall under Southern lit.
Hmm.
And Ernest Gaines definitely was a Southern writer
Yeah.
out of Louisiana. But the thing about hearing her, because we read a couple of short stories from her in that particular class. And it wasn't so much reading the story, it was the way the professor would read certain passages of the story that I just was like, yeah, I want to sound like that. I want to
Yeah.
be like that guy. And so even when I actually was at Maryland and then I left Maryland, I went to the University of District of Columbia for my to get my undergrad. And it was always with the way the professor would perform the reading that just inspired me to want to be a professor because I liked the way they would read. Um, and that was kind of the thing that was alluring
Yeah.
major.
How much they loved it made you love it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they that like how they could just like put that rhythm and put that thing together that you could feel it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that was sort of like what poetry open mic poetry reading was like, but
Yeah.
except they would be taking passages of maybe passages of a Caribbean writer or passages of
Mhm.
Virginia Woolf or something, and they would read it in such a with such inflection, such um spirit that it just always inspired me, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're bringing something that's really important. That connects with music too, the inflection and the rhythm of poetry and other readings, right? And something that we've kind of fallen away from in academia is like the experience of reading together out loud in a classroom setting, and just like the importance of hearing each other read, and that collective experience, which we get when we go to poetry readings or other readings, Um, yeah, it's so important to be in a group setting and hear each other read, especially someone who knows how to read, right? And
Yeah, that matters.
yeah,
Because some people could read
yeah,
their work and you just feel like, yo, you should have got an actor.
yeah, so
Like
true.
yeah, like sometimes I try audiobooks and it depends on who the
Who's reading?
reader is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so true.
because it can make the book
Okay.
really, really good, or you
Mm.
could it's like, yo, I'd rather read this myself instead
Yeah,
of just try to have
it's so
listen to the artist read it. And I'm not gonna put anybody's name out there because some of them are really big fans of.
yeah,
But yo, it's just like
yeah.
I would listen and go, oh,
Yeah, it makes all the difference for sure.
yeah.
So I think that's a good transition to get to your talk, because you did that, like you had us all captivated in the way that you were
Oh, thank you.
were presenting your talk. We were there experiencing these songs that you were talking about and these lyrics,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
we were going back in time, and you were talking about some of the movies, like Sinners and stuff, that we were like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, that we felt it too, like
Mm-hmm.
so one of the things you said is, if you know the soundtrack of my life, you will know what's in my heart, mind, and soul, So maybe say more about what it means to understand a person's life through sound. We've talked a little
Mm.
bit more about writing and reading, understanding someone through that. You can bring those lenses into it as well if you want. But yeah, through music, through and sound. Yeah. But
Yeah, and I'm very familiar that people who have hearing impairment, they may not feel the same type of rhythm, but I
mm,
think they feel a type of beat, right? And so
yeah.
that beat becomes kind of significant of how they embrace, musicality and things like
Mhm.
that, right? And so I think for those of us who can appreciate the sound of music, and not no pun intended right there, but who can really, engage in that way. Um, it's kind of like a gift. It's like storytelling, right? And so one of the things that helped me a lot with music and appreciating music and listening to music and finding meaning of songs that um, say speak to me and speak to my moment. A lot of that had to do with the fact that I didn't have the television all the time, but I always had music or access to music.
Yeah.
And even when I would be going to school, either high school or college, if I'm on the train, because I grew up in Washington, D.C.,
Mhm.
and I would, catch a bus and I would listen to music, and I would always listen to songs that somehow were speaking to the moment I was in. And it
Mm.
was providing kind of a soundtrack. And my wife, I've joked with her about this. When I used to live in my apartment, I lived on my own for a while. Since about 17, 18, it was kind of like on my own. Um, and I had an answer machine. So for some people who are new,
Old school, right?
that predates
Mm.
voicemail. So I had an answer machine, and I would put songs as the lead in, like so if someone called
Love it.
and
I
they
love
heard let's say it might be uh the OJs or something.
it. Mhm.
We cried for we last night. Me and my woman, we cried together, and that would be the intro to leaving a message.
Love
So
it.
people would almost always know that I must be in a mood of some sort, or I would have breakup songs,
Yeah.
like some stylistic
They know
breakup to
how
make
to
up.
talk to you based on.
Exactly, exactly. And so I had all these, and so sometimes people would just hang up because because I would just have all these like 30-second snippets. And if you're a bill collector and you're hearing this makeup to breakup, you're not gonna like, what's that doing?
So
And
funny.
so
Good.
a lot of times I would use music to really not just express my feelings, but express what was actually going on
Mm,
at the moment.
mm.
I almost always chose R&B
Mhm.
or jazz,
Yeah.
not because I was opposed to like rap music or go-go, which is one of my favorite musical art forms, but they never really. You had to sometimes go through a series of things in terms of lyrics or in terms of beats and percussive sounds if it was like go-go or rap that never really got to the point. Whereas I think with R&B music or jazz singers, I could always find that moment. So like Shirley Horn is one of my favorite singers, pianist and jazz singer, and she had this song called "You Won't Forget Me."
Mhm.
And then she also had a song, "Don't Let the Sun." It's not her song, but she sung the song, "Don't Let the Sun Catch You Crying at My Front Door." And I would have that, especially if I had a bad relationship with a young
Yeah.
lady. It's just like, "Don't let the sun catch you crying at my front door." You
That's
know,
so
so and so people could hear
yeah.
and I was kind of creating a sound and
Mm.
creating a point without ever really expressing it myself.
Yeah.
So that's how music has been effective, you know.
I used to put songs on my answering machine too. With sometimes without even my voice. I would just
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah. Or I might have said leave a message.
yeah. Right at the end.
Right at the end, leave a message. But yeah.
Good. So one of the things that also stayed with me is how deeply your story was rooted in family and
Hmm.
in Black tradition, Black musical traditions. And you spoke about your
Absolutely.
mother and your grandmother and your sister and the ways music lived within those relationships. Um, and much of what you describe is grounded in Black traditions, right? And Black cultural
Hmm.
life spaces where music carries history, struggle, joy, survival. So, how do you understand your relation? relationship to Black music, both personally and as part of this larger cultural racial tradition.
Yeah, I think like a lot of traditions, they're a continuation of one another. They're like these pieces that link together. Whether that's through my familial ties, um, and or within the community, music has always been a significant part.
Yeah.
I'm teaching a class, for instance, at Towson, where we look at African American artistic expression and social activism. And so, one of the things I try to get students to understand is that these things are continuing. They're not necessarily frozen in a moment.
Mm,
Even if they do speak to a moment,
mm,
they're not frozen in that moment. They just continue to move in a particular kind of way. Um, I saw this post by a guy named Van Lathan. This was maybe a little more than a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, and he was saying to his audience how if you listen to the sample, if you listen to the actual version of a sample from a hip hop song, it's way better than a hip hop song, and I think he's right.
yeah.
Um, and I think the thing is sonically, when you hear Lou Rawls, when you hear Teddy Pendergrass, when you hear Patti LaBelle, even
Mhm.
if it's in a sample, it always harkens back to something that you can that you can actually touch and feel again. Even if
Yeah.
that hip hop song is really cool, when you go back to that song, like I think Larry June samples Early Morning Love by
Mhm.
Lou Rawls. And that song, I like Larry June. So if Larry June was there to see this, I'm not dissing Larry June. But the Lou Rawls song is way better. It's like 10
Mhm.
times better because it's such a rhythm. And his voice is such a powerful voice. And Lou Rawls' significance to the African American community is he's kind of one of those unsung heroes because he had the Lou Rawls Parade of Stars, and it's back in those years where they would have telethons and you
Yeah.
would raise money, and his was for the United Negro College Fund, and their slogan was a mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Mhm.
And I think that is one of those things where, again, when you can see that moment, but it's not frozen in that time because there's some significance. I remember seeing that when I was a kid. I never thought I would tap into the United Negro Fund for college. I never thought
Yeah.
as a kid, but it did help me in so many different ways to understand that there is a path for active creative mind. And so, in terms of the cultural dynamics, in terms of the social political dynamics, at least for me as a young man growing up in Washington D.C. and an impoverished community that some people would consider had high crime. It was more or less high reported crime, but not. I don't think it was the most criminally
Yeah.
infested environment on earth. But
For
that's
sure.
how it was reported.
Right.
That music was essential and continues to be essential in the ways in which we talk about our struggles, in the ways in which we talk about just to love one another,
Mhm.
to the love to be in a relationship with somebody who is of a similar cultural background is a struggle. In fact, love is a struggle,
Yeah.
regardless of your racial background or your socioeconomic background. So
Yeah.
again, I consider a lot of that the continuum is part of the storytelling. It's sort of the background music to the story, um, and it's almost always a part of who we are. I think mostly as human beings, but definitely as African Americans, we lean into
Yeah.
the music a lot.
Yes.
I don't know
Uh,
if that answered your question, by the
well,
way.
no, that was a beautiful answer, and I think that it's so layered, right? That the way that you're bringing in this nuance to um, Black culture and through music and connecting it to academic culture, I think is so
Mhm.
really cool. Just really, really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, but academic culture doesn't, and I say this as someone who's been in colleges and universities for pretty much all this century. Um, it doesn't always appreciate that. It
Yeah.
it doesn't,
Yeah.
I don't know why,
Yeah.
but it doesn't, I think sometimes it overly objectifies, and I mean in terms of it looks at music as an object and it doesn't look at it in a subjective way. So I think you get people who critique music, who analyze music, but they also make it a little more sterile.
Yeah.
And for my way of thinking, it's not like in an operating room and you have to dissect it.
Yeah.
You have to feel it and name those feelings and name those thoughts that those feelings conjure up.
Yeah.
um and I think that that is the beauty of music just writ large for me.
Yeah. They start to overthink it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you put in yeah, they do they over theorize music
Yeah.
and in a way that just kind of, oh, well, I wasn't thinking like that, but
Right.
that's the nature of academia. Yeah, and I appreciate academia for what it is. I think I've always had a kind of loose relationship with it.
Hmm.
Um, and we could talk about that if you want to, but yeah,
Yeah.
I've always had a kind of loose relationship with academia.
No, I appreciate it. That's something I'm trying to do with, um, well, I'm studying decolonial theory. I'm bringing indigenous methodologies into it. And so something I'm trying to do with this platform is um, bring those things into it, but also bring a space for um, um, deeper analysis into my reviews, while also questioning academia, right? So
Hmm.
this juxtaposition of like, oh, who are these shows for? And who are they talking to? Where is the conversation happening? And my positionality as a reviewer already, right? Like, what are reviews doing? Why are we critiquing, right? Who is the conversation happening between? So I'm kind of trying to push back on all of that and make my position as a reviewer more relational than like I'm
Mm.
at you, you know. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I think that's the word, um, relationship and
Mm,
relational, and that is how we make those connections. That's how we can feel and hear and experience,
mhm.
um, that continuous thread.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I think that's where academic culture is lacking the most, right? That we try to make things so like sterile and static that it loses the beauty of the relationships that can come through it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There is a tendency to make things emotionless.
Yes.
And it's like, why would you want to be emotionless? Rationalism isn't devoid of emotion. You
Hmm.
know, I
Hmm.
think that people look at rationalism as somehow another, like Aristotle meant, like, you don't have any emotion unless someone's trying to release something cathartic. I think what really rationalism is to understand yourself and understand your relationship to other people in a variety of contexts and a variety of situations. If we're at a grocery store and a song comes over, they play music, and you're standing in line, and another person is standing in line. It's a song that you both really like. That's a relationship, you know. But
Absolutely.
if we're in an academic environment, there's going to be some theory about how capitalism is impacting the ways in which music is being commodified in the grocery store, and it sort of takes it. I mean, that's true, but it's taking away from that instant relatable experience. to basically theorize about something else that has little to do with the original.
That's so true. That goes perfectly into what I was going to ask you next. After your talk, I noticed several musicians coming up to you to share how deeply your words resonated. What I was one of them because I started in music, right? And it felt like they were hearing themselves reflected in what you were saying. Um, so, how do you understand the relationship between music and writing in your own work? And what does it mean to you when musicians respond strongly, to like what you're doing in as a teacher, as a writer, as, someone speaking about these things?
Yeah, I went to Duke Ellington School of the Arts. And so hearing singers, hearing musicians was part of the sort of my formative years of high school. Um, on top of the fact that it was already kind of permeating in the city, and it definitely in my household. But in terms of having musicians like yourself
Mm,
resonate with what I said, that was kind of a new experience in a way. Like, I've done some like performing poetry with musicians before, but it was sort of kind of thrown together in a way. No disrespect to those cats, but it was just kind of thrown together in a way. Um, but to sort of present um, this sort of talk about remixing and rediscovering sort of the writing, the music and the writing voice. That was essentially my way of saying that as academics, as writers, we have to listen and say less. And that's really hard for academics to say less. I mean, I think I've been dominating this conversation, like
yeah,
because
that's
yeah. But I think for musicians, it becomes very clear that they have to listen in
hmm
ways because they're not only listening to notes, they're listening to the cadences, they're listening to a particular kind of flow, they're listening to the ways in which maybe someone is playing the guitar. They're hearing things that your average listener probably doesn't catch. Um, and a good friend of mine, well, we worked together. He might not still be a friend of mine, but it was a jazz cat named Jay Jefferson, and he was heavy into Art Blakey. And he would, tell me about how Art Blakey would hold the sticks. And
hmm
none of that really, I mean, it's a drummer, but he helped me see how important it is to just listen. Um, and there were a
Yeah.
lot of like people, musicians in the past that I would, take some interest in what they were saying. Um, and so when there were people like Earl Brooks was another person. I know he plays the trumpet, I think, but he's also a scholar at University of Maryland, Boston, not Boston College, University of Maryland, Baltimore County.
Yeah.
Having him, vibe with what I said, that made me so it does make me feel good, but I am nowhere near the listener as a musician is. I won't even pretend I have those kind of ears. But I do try. In fact, my director, his name's Wayne Robertson. He's a musician as well, which is kind of crazy. Like I know a lot of musicians, and there are a lot of musicians in academia, which is another thing
Yeah.
that's kind of interesting.
I think that's interesting too. Maybe it's because, music is a hard avenue to follow these days and make it a living. You have to be so dedicated to stick it out. But I think you're hitting on something so, so, so important, the act of listening and how crucial it is to musicianship, in particular ensemble work and in jazz. It's something I've written a little bit about in my reviews, just like it's crucial, right? You can't play as a group and flow and support each other without listening and being in the moment intently, right? And it doesn't
Yeah.
just you'll fall apart if it's this dance of listening, right? That um
Yeah,
and it's so beautiful to watch a good
yeah,
group grooving together, listening. Yeah.
yeah. Getting into that groove, even if you're doing improv or you're, ad
Yeah.
libbing.
Yeah.
If in order to make really good improv, you have to really be good at listening. You got to know when to like
Yeah.
deviate and move in a different
And,
kind of space.
yeah, it's so true. And I have another one of your quotes about listening. Like, too many of us cannot listen because we have not learned how to be silent. I think we're so bad at that in academia, especially as teachers, right? We're not listening because we're too busy talking, right? And like trying to teach. And that was something that struck me in your talk. Like, we how can we be good teachers if we're not even listening to our students and their needs, you know?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. There's like a
You're
giant moth
totally
in my
good.
in my house.
Get them
It's
off.
just-
Get them
no, no, no. It's cool. It's cool.
off.
When I was younger, my grandmother used to say that they bring good luck. I always thought like, nah, that thing needs to get gone. But
Sometimes, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And you see something fluttering out of the corner of your eye, like what? So, but yeah, anyway. Yeah, I think that is part of the reasons why I think I've been had this sort of loose relationship with academia. Um, Not because I think people overtalk or they don't listen. I think they have selective listening.
Mm,
Um, they're listening for something they want to hear, and when they don't hear it, they just start talking. Um, and so the challenge for especially writing teachers is to listen to their students. I think sometimes we think that our students do not have what we have, so they don't know what we know. But the opposite is true. We don't know what they have, and we don't know if we could actually function in their space. And so I try to, as much as I possibly can, to sort of give students that space so that I can listen. And the challenge is that they've been conditioned to believe that the only way they can be educated is to remain silent and listen to somebody who is standing in front of them, usually. And that person is the reservoir in which they will drain their knowledge without really understanding that they bring something to the table that is equally valuable to the whole enterprise of learning. Like learning is not a one-way street.
mm,
Learning is an opportunity for both or all the people in that room to gain some insight into one another. It goes back to the whole relational piece. I
mm,
can't be a professor that only talks to students. I rather be a professor that talks with them. And so that we have something in common that we're working together. Now, it's not easy because, again, they've been conditioned too. And so trying to get them to unlearn some of that, trying to get them to recognize that they bring something valuable to this experience, that they need to listen to themselves, their internal selves and their communal selves. That is a challenge, but it is one that I really feel that is necessary more than it's been necessary before. I think when I was in college, um, I think people wanted to know what you think. That was the big thing. They want you to think for yourself and everything like that. And I had enough experience with figuring things out on my own that I could participate in that kind of academic rigor where you sort of you're contemplative, and then you bring your questions up to into the classroom. So that was an experience that I had, but many of the students that I encounter now never had that experience of just sitting with their thoughts and then sharing their thoughts. Because
yeah.
oftentimes in K-12, especially since No Child Left Behind,
Hmm.
everything has been sort of frayed. And so their ability to just think through for themselves has been conditioned through testing, conditioned through shorter readings, conditioned through certain types of metrics or benchmark assessments that will indicate that they've grown in a particular kind of way. And it never really is about the students. And so for me, and maybe part of this also is going to a performing arts high school, that's a different kind of context, educational context. Um, it may just be that. That's why I'm the way I am. But
Right.
I also think that it has something to do with the way students in the 21st century in particular have been conditioned. And I think that is the biggest struggle to get them to understand that their voices, their internal voices, their community voices are equally important to the academic space. And it takes
Yeah.
the academician the time to just sit and listen to that and request that more and more.
Yeah. And I think that is a really hard thing as a teacher to create a space that where students feel safe to,
Hmm.
to do that. And then where they feel comfortable and know how to do that. I've had student evaluations say like, I didn't like how much discussion we had to do,
Yeah.
in this class. That's I'm not used to it. Um, or and then, other classes where they love it. But I'm trying to remember one comment from a student from this semester. She said, just like creating more assignments where we're allowed to play, like
Mm.
and that resonated with me. So what do you think that looks like? Like, how do we create opportunities for students to play or just like open up in that way where we're listening, in a way that they get to speak in an authentic way?
Yeah. It can be a little tricky, and I think it takes a little bit of time.
Hmm.
Um, what my experience has been having more small group activities, getting students to talk with one another. Um, that's usually the
Yeah.
first
Yeah.
iteration of that. Also doing student conferencing,
Hmm.
where you're not necessarily talking about their grade, but you're talking about them and
Yeah.
what you see in their writing and what you hope to see more of. But to be honest, Keola, it ain't easy. Every semester is a different semester. And
Yeah.
so in the fall, it could, it might be a little hard going, especially if you got first years. It may take until week 7 till you get people to really open up.
Yeah.
If it's in the spring, it might be week 5, it might be week 9.
Mhm.
Um, in my current situation, I think most of the students were active, which is great. Until I asked them a question in which it's required for them to think through certain things, and then they begin to be a little hesitant.
Mhm.
So I didn't say like pair up with your neighbor or pair up or have a trio, and then you work together and try to come up with something that you present to the class.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes it's the same set of voices, but I've noticed of late that there are more newer voices presenting and participating. But it may take a few. Now, I should also point out that my class meets once a week. It might be a little bit different if we met twice a week.
Yeah.
That may expedite it, but
Right. Get more comfortable.
typically speaking, it takes a couple of weeks. And if you're in an open access institution or a minority serving institution,
Mhm.
there could be some levels of not necessarily distrust, but uneasiness because they're not sure what this is looking like because it may be the first time they've really ever been asked to present their thoughts on a particular thing. Um, and so you kind of have to wait it out. You can't rush through it. You can't force them. and they have to also see from you some level of authenticity. You have to be willing to share and not just be the sage on the stage, as they like to say, but
Yeah.
just be the person who isn't standing in front of them, but maybe sitting with them or
Yeah.
moving around with them, and just trying to get them to understand that just because I have a PhD doesn't mean I know everything.
Yeah.
In fact, I would argue I only know this amount of it's a very small amount of things. And so it's just getting students to recognize that, part of my job is to get to know them.
Yeah.
And part of the way I do assessment is I base things on growth. So I want
Mm,
to see from week 1 to week 15 how far you've grown. And those
mm,
are usually through conversations. And sometimes you know, it's tough conversations.
yeah.
But I think I would like to believe, I don't know, but I would like to believe that people can tell that I'm sincere.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and so I do know that if a person feels that you sincerely care and that you really are listening to them, I think they will rise to the occasion.
Mm,
But if
mhm.
they feel like you're just kind of going through the motions and you're just saying things, but you're not really showing it,
Yeah.
they're not going to believe
Yeah. No, I think you're hitting the head on something really important and vulnerability in some way, right?
it. Mm-hmm.
Whatever way you feel comfortable and whatever way you can. I think Norma Cantu, who she works in Texas and she's a writer as well. She's published several books. She said she's about to retire, but she said she still will write when the students are writing with them, sometimes she'll
Mm.
share her work with them. And I think that's so cool. Like sometimes we're just so busy that we don't even like take time to slow down and like
Yeah, yeah, it's that slow down piece because we have, think if you're teaching in a first year class or you're teaching a seminar class, there are certain expectations you got to meet. And
yeah.
so you're trying to kind of wrap it, like, let's keep it going, but that's not always the best way for some students, for many students, I would say.
Uh-huh. I think that could be such a great way to like break down, those walls between students to like do what they're doing and then share your work with them too.
Yeah. Or even model how you read something,
Yeah, yeah.
I've done that before, project how, like, and I would read it and I would stop and say, well, this is the thing this that I do, when I'm reading it, if I'm annotating. I would, in the past, I've shown students how I got there.
Mm,
But I've been hesitant to do that because sometimes that modeling could become overwhelming,
right.
especially if a student doesn't necessarily read in that kind of way. And so I've been trying to play with how we could talk about reading and how we can, model it for each other, and not just the professor models is
Yeah.
reading it, everyone must follow this, but how others may read differently and how we could learn from that. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I know we have to wrap up soon.
Yeah, yeah.
There was two other things I had on my questions. One was I know there was sections of your talk that you had to cut out for C's.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
We don't have to get to that, but I just wanted to create a space. If you did want to mention anything that got cut for C's.
Yeah, well, the one thing, really, there's two things, but the one thing that I really wanted to highlight is the real harm that grading can do
Mhm.
to the very things we're talking about in terms of having students open up and having students express their ideas. Um, when everything is measured or is there some kind of ranking and sorting, I think students can become hesitant to share things or hesitant to take a risk if they feel like it's going to have a detrimental effect on their grades.
Yeah.
And so that is one of those harms that I'm guilty of, and that it took me a while to recognize just how detrimental those grades is. What got cut out was I was mentioning Joshua Eiler's book, Failing Our Future. And he talks a lot about what we can do to resolve some of this anxiety that is created when you have a heavy grade centric
Mhm.
um, system. And so, and then the other part was with Ruha Benjamin, her imagination manifesto, and I was sort of putting those two in conversation, and that would I think Josh and well, I'm calling him Josh because he and I went to graduate school together in
So,
UConn.
mhm.
So what Eiler and Benjamin are really talking about is a different way of imagining what is possible, not just for ourselves, but for students as well.
Mhm.
And the secondary thing is Adam Banks's Digital Griots and Todd Craig's K for the Way. They basically talk about the impact of music and storytelling and culture. But they focus on, well, uh, Todd Craig focused mainly on the DJ. Um, and, for me, radio disc jockeys and radio personalities were sort of these cultural archivists, and the music that they would put in just definitely before some of the larger corporate entities like iHeart came into play.
Right.
But your local radio station, when they had disc jockeys
Mhm.
who would, play music, and I equate um, uh, Adam Banks to, I believe, Melvin Lindsay, and I equate Donnie Simpson to Todd Craig, and how these personalities, again, were these cultural archivists. And so Melvin Lindsay is the originator of The Quiet Storm. Smokey Robinson had a song called The Quiet Storm, and I think that was the name of the album. But Melvin Lindsay's The Quiet Storm became the standard bearer for like slow jams that has been used in a lot of Black radio formats. And
Mhm.
he was out of Howard University. And so, and Donnie Simpson came from Detroit. He was at, I think, WKYS, which was a DC area radio station. And he would bring in this not just Motown sound, but this whole vibe of music. And I remember, listening to them in the morning times, and I would listen to Donnie Simpson, and then that was on WKYS, and at night you would have The Quiet Storm with Melvin Lindsay, and it was just this real tapestry of music, and so for me, those two parts taken out for time
Yeah,
constraints. So
yeah.
yeah, that part was
That's a
missing.
shame
So
too, 'cause
so the
that's
more theoretical parts were
yeah.
taken out to the point I
Think
was making.
sources and link them on the article, and if I put this on YouTube, or I'll link them those sources too, because those sound so helpful and just like
Oh yeah.
culturally rich. In my dissertation, I'm bringing in performance as an archive and counter archive, juxtaposition
Mm,
those two ideas of like how they're talking to one another in these timelines, especially with in academic culture, Um,
yeah.
so I think that's really fascinating. Howard University has done some amazing work, I think,
Oh yeah, absolutely. And their radio station
Mhm.
has stood the test of time.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure,
absolutely.
for sure. I mean, the last question I had was just, hey, yes, you want to talk too.
Hmm.
Um, if there's one thing you hope educators take from your work on music listening or anything teaching, what do you think it would be?
Um, Trust that students bring more to the table than you might believe.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah,
I love it.
yes, yeah. Oh, but thank you for
Yeah.
wanting to talk with me.
Oh, thank you
I
so much
appreciate it.
for the time. This has been such a rich conversation. I feel just um, so enriched by everything you've said. And yeah, just a
Oh,
great conversation. Thank you, Kofi.
hey, no problem. Thank you.